Welcome into the Backroads Bill podcast. I'm Ben, and today, Bill and I are going to be talking about 3 environmental catastrophes that happened in Northern Ontario back in the past. We're going to be talking about kind of how they happened, mostly due to a lack of consultation and understanding of the ramifications and focusing on the profit now versus what it means for our land in the future, and how these events helped shape some of the policies and the ways that the government and companies go about conducting their business today. So we have talked about this before briefly on this podcast with the mine reclamation episode with Roy Slack, how mines need to be thinking about what happens in the future once they close down, and just kind of how we need to be more mindful of what we do with our land instead of just looking at it from a profit standpoint. So all of that is on the way, but first, a word from today's title sponsor, the Laframboise team at Realty Executive Local Group Inc. Broker.
Hi, I'm Natasha Laframboise, sales representative with the Laframboise team at Realty Executives Local Group Inc. Brokerage. We are a local real estate team here in North Bay. Our team of sales representatives, Matt Laframboise, Phil Seguin, and Adam Legros, are ready to help you through the buying and selling experience. We have been providing service to the North Bay and area community for over 17 years. Our goal is to provide knowledge, support, and guidance in order to prepare your home for sale, bring it to market using multiple selling strategies, and get it sold. As a home buyer, we have 2 buyer's agents ready to help you find your home sweet home. If you'd like to know more, check us out on our website, laframboiseteam.ca. We are always happy to help.
So, Bill, today we don't have a guest. Unfortunately, the guest who was supposed to be on this episode, Wob Rice, who's a very renowned author, Indigenous author, couldn't make it and we wanted to discuss this on the show a little bit because today, we are recording this a little bit early at the beginning of November. Today was actually the day that Murray Sinclair passed away. And I know we wanted to mention a little bit, and unfortunately was a good friend of Wob who was not able to make it in. But we are going to get him in at some point. Hopefully, that will probably air in the new year. But I wanted to give you the opportunity because on this podcast, we talk a lot about Indigenous culture. And I just wanted to let you, talk about him a little bit.
Justice Murray Sinclair, who we all know is related to the Truth and Reconciliation Report and all the recommendations, has been an insightful, impactful voice for Indigenous people for many, many years. And that's how he will be remembered and respected. And there will be ceremonial fires for him because of his contributions, as all spirited people are. But that is in history that related to all of Canada and what we know of the inclusive part of all of Canada. He will be missed for his contribution of making something wrong much righter than it was.
Yeah, absolutely. And our thoughts, of course, with everybody who is hurting with the loss of Murray, as again a huge part of the Indigenous culture and made huge strides here in Canada as well. So.
Well, it's kind of a good lead-in a sense, because the values of the land and water and resources in Indigenous culture and ways, and so this show kind of is kind of a summary of 3 environmental events or catastrophes or things that we just wouldn't do before, and all of them had no consultation whatsoever. So if this is a tribute to Murray Sinclair, Justice Murray Sinclair, or all Indigenous people, so be it, because we would just not do anything like this ever again. And we'll go through them, and I urge people to Google these events. I've written stories on them all. You can go Backroads Bill Village Media and put the titles in. And of course, there are hundreds and hundreds of Backroads Bill stories, and we're reliving a lot of them on the Backroads Bill podcast with host Ben Sargent, and we've done more than 60 of them now. We're probably, next thing you know, we'll have more than 100 in the library. We're talking about people and events and things that are important to not only the North Bay, but Northern Ontario and even further beyond. We've talked about an explorer who rode her trike to the South Pole, and we've had so many neat authors on and people who do interesting things on the backroads and in nature.
Yeah, and obviously environmental impact is a huge thing that's a constant conversation, at least in the mining world, between the government and the different Indigenous peoples. And it's these stories are a good indication of like how we can grow in the future because of, as you said, the lack of consultation, the lack of understanding. And so why don't we start off with
Steep Rock.
Steep Rock. There you go.
I want to take everyone and have to unfold that paper map in the glove compartment or go on screen and put in.
I don't know how many people still have a map in their glove compartment.
They should, because it's all about scale, and the paper map's never going away, Ben. But that's up for another
I know my
show.
mom does. Actually, when she went to Ottawa a few weekends ago, she actually was like, I pulled out the old paper map. I was like, okay,
well,
good for you.
That's a good thing. And again, I've written a book on navigation called What Do Those Numbers Mean Anyway? I wrote that like 25 years ago based on when GPS first came out. But you can Google Atikokan in northwestern Ontario, which is on Highway 17 out of Thunder Bay. Highways 11 and 17 diverge again. Remember, in Ontario we have two Trans-Canada highways. They start in North Bay. They go in two different directions. They come back to Nipigon, Red Rock. They join. Then they're together north of Thunder Bay. They go in two different directions. One goes up towards Ignace and Dryden, Kenora, etc., and the other one goes over to Rainy River, Fort Francis. So Atikokan is over that Fort Francis way. And back in the 1930s, they discovered iron ore. Now, iron ore became really important in the Second World War, obviously for steel fabrication and the like, and armaments. So what they did in Atikokan, they drained a lake called Steep Rock Lake. It's not really a lake anymore. They had to drain it and dredge it and started an open pit mine there, and it lasted for, I think, into the 1980s. It's in the Backroads Village Media Story called Steep Rock. And there were a number of open pits, huge ones. And in fact, they took more aggregate out of the one pit than the entire Panama Canal.
Wow.
Not only wide but deep. I've been to the largest actually open pit mine in the world, the De Beers diamond mine in Botswana, and it's forget how many kilometers across in both directions. These are very wide across as well. Anyway, they're open pit mines and bring a tremendous impact on the local economy for many, many, many years. And the next thing you know, prior to the Mining Act changing in 1990, mining companies just walked away from their properties. Like that's, they put millions and millions of dollars in the local economy, and they were sold or shut down, and they just were left behind. So whether they're shaft mines or open pits, this was an open pits, plural, iron ore mines. And what was discovered, was shut down for a while. Tremendous impact on the local economy. Even to this day, Atikokan is a mere shadow of itself. Kind of like one of those ghost towns, a lot of empty spaces on the main street, et cetera, et cetera. I really noticed that the other day when I just have to think of the place, but it'll come to me in a moment, where a lot of these mining towns have kind of almost disappeared because, it's Wawa. I was going through Wawa coming back from Thunder Bay. There they had iron ore mines as well, and
well, you think of like
mills.
the Abitibi Canyon and some of the stories that we've done.
Well, yeah, and then but Wawa the other day, I was devastated by the number of places that were shut down. Even to the fact that the Tim Hortons does not operate 24/7. Operates only like from I think 5 a.m. till 6 p.m. or something like that.
That's when you're starting to go downhill, when you're Tim Hortons, a staple of Canada.
I remember and it became problematic in Wawa during COVID because you go through there, and that's the first time I saw it. And the answer is there's not enough immigrants to work or students because they're just not there. Small community away from Sault Ste. Marie way, so there's just not enough people in the town to work these places, we'll call them, the service industry, and that's what we're all suffering from across the north. When you think about it, Northern Ontario, and I'm glad I'm off the topic already of steep rock iron ore mines, and I'll get right back to it, is that, we only have 3 or 4% of the entire Ontario population, only a few ridings. Really, Northern Ontario doesn't matter. The only thing that matters, and you see the Governor of Ontario ads right now as we speak in November, December of 2024, they start with mining shots with people underground and go right into electrification. And it's all about north and south. And that's what the north is valuable to, our minerals. And of course, the Ring of Fire will be the next big, like the Sudbury Basin thing. It's just about to happen. But in back to Atikokan and the Steep Rock mine. So the mine shut down, I think, in the 1980s. It's in the article. And then afterwards, most in mitigation and refurbishment, the Mining Act in 1990, you can no longer walk away from a mine. Before a mine starts now, there is a whole process. And one of the things, you have to put money down in bonds, and you have to have a mine closure plan. Prior to 1990, and of course there are thousands of abandoned mines. There's an abandoned mines registry. And for people that like going on the Backroads, it's like a treasure trove to go and see old abandoned mining adits and try to find stuff in the piles, waste rock piles and things like that. A lot of them have been fenced off. Some of them have been capped or posted to being unsafe. But in the steep rock iron ore pits, they started, all of a sudden people noticed, hey, these are starting to fill in with water too quickly. Now, again, some, like in Timmins, right in it's city of the heart of gold, someday that open pit mine, which is right downtown Timmins, will be a recreational area. They will purposely flood it, create green spaces all around it, a beach, viewing areas, et cetera, trails. So,
and we did talk about that a little bit. We had Roy Slack on a while ago, and we were talking about the Ring of Fire. We were talking about mine reclamation, and I think actually the title of it is about mine reclamation.
Yeah.
So
on the Backroads.
If you're more interested in that section, go back and listen to that
the
episode.
Backroads podcast with Roy Slack from Cementation. So they determined the pits, the iron ore pits, water was seeping in to the point. Then some big brains came along and started studying it. That now, and this study was this story has been done by me and others, that in about 30 to 40 years from now, it will flood the pit and go on the landscape and flood the connecting road, a secondary highway between Highway 11 and Highway 17. These open pits started to fill in to the point that 30 or 40 years from now, they'll flood a highway connecting Highway 17 to the south of Atikokan going to Fort Francis, and the highway connects us north towards Ignace. So this will become a catastrophe. And so now when they had to, in the beginning, take the water out of Steep Rock Lake, now they're going to have to take that same water and make it flow another way back into that system that makes the water flow northward towards James Bay and Hudson Bay, to the point that the water course will have to be treated as well. It's a huge environmental story. It's going to cost, who knows, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. It's a well-kept, it's not a secret. The Ontario government has been forced to take on this nightmare and do something about it, because it has to be done, because it's just going to continue to fill in, and then they're going to have to manage this new amount of water, which is coming in through the cracks and fissures into the open pit. So that's an interesting story based on mining legacy, I suppose, but into the point where, wow, we're going to have to come up with some really neat environmental solutions for this to mitigate this catastrophe. And of course, the taxpayers of Ontario will be saddled with this. And again, it's not so well known.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to one of those situations where it's people doing stuff to make money now and not thinking about that. Maybe they weren't aware, but there's probably some, like, that's not an us problem. That's a future problem. And now it's becoming a future problem. And one of those things with mining is, as you said, with the reclamation acts and stuff, they're working depending on who you talk to, they're working really well, a lot with Indigenous people and there's a huge focus on environmental impact and as you said, what happens in the mine after it's done. And it's just a really good example of like, you weren't prepared or you weren't thinking that far ahead. And now we're kind of dealing with that the same way you look at like climate change or any of those other big impacts that, are starting to become issues now.
Well, you think very quickly, I don't want to get off topic as I normally do, but there's the mine in Tobogami, the iron ore mine was there, and it's still there, and it's not flooded. I don't think it's probably water is seeping in. And of course, the big one which was an environmental issue, was the Adams mine near Kirkland Lake, another iron ore mine at the time. Those pellets would go down to the steel mills in Hamilton by rail car. That was the bread and butter of the Ontario Northbound Railway for years and years. And they were going to turn that Adams mine into, Toronto was going to ship all their garbage up to the Adams mine. And Gordon McGinney, well-known North Bayite and friend of Mike Harris, they're long-time friends. And Mike Harris eventually became the premier. So the Adams mine almost became a reality. But what happened was two things. And I have a personal connection to it. Two things. The farmers of the Temiskaming Shores area, the might of the farmers, and that's why we have the NDP party and the CCF in the West. The might of the farmers joined together and really shut that whole concept down in the end. And of course, there were people not living close to that mine kilometers away. And the concept was bring the garbage up in steel-proof, bulletproof cars, dump them in the mine, sort it, get the methane gas, which all landfill sites are kind of doing today. It was so far ahead of its time in a controlled environment, kilometers away from people, and would have been an environmental solution. But the farmers, and then Jack Layton, who was a councillor in Toronto before he became the leader of the NDP party, I remember, I presented the environmental part, the worthiness of the environmental part at a hearing in Toronto, at City Hall in Toronto, and Jack Layton just tore me to pieces like at no other time. I went out of there feeling like, wow, I don't know anything. It just made the whole thing look bad.
You were worried about the environmental concerns.
I was worried. No, I thought we as a Canadian college thought it was a good idea at the time because it was going to do all these things. The farmers said the water was going to percolate into water bodies and end up 100 kilometers away.
Is that a legit thing though? Like, was that?
I'm not going to get into that. The Adams mine was going to be, they were going to put a buffer into it, seal it off so that water contamination or seepage would not. Anyway, it's a long story. And in fact, I was going to write the book called The Long Haul because it was all railway, but it never came to be. It never came to be. So that was on the verge of an environmental story. But the Steep Rock, the Atikokan and Steep Rock mines is one that's occurring right before our very eyes right now because people just walked away from that.
Yeah, and it's just reading this really quickly on Wikipedia. There's one of the names that jumped out was Charlie Angus, who was against the proposal as well.
At the Adams mine?
Yeah, he organized the campaign against it. Yeah,
he probably cut his teeth, so to speak, in the early days. He's retiring this year. He's not going to run in the next election. We'll have him on the Backroads Bill podcast because he just published another book. He's a great storyteller of the labor movement in Northern Ontario and a sitting member MP for Timmins James Bay for the longest time, and has been a great voice for the North. And so, yes, he was in the early days of the Adams mine. I think just about the time he became an MP, he was a vocal critic of that and helped organize all that. Anyway, that never came to pass. But those were some of the things, those NIMBY things, not in my backyard. And that's a perfect example of a NIMBY. The town of Kirkland Lake wanted it. The mayor came out for it, and it's going to create jobs, and it would have. It was repurposing something in a logical way. But then that whole NIMBY kind of mindset came on, much like the Red Squirrel Road in the logging protests, where really it started the Indigenous movement. We should have someone on the podcast who lived that, and there are people out there that live that existence that really brought to the attention to the values of Indigenous people across the land. So these environmental events and things occur, and often it's at the right time, as opposed to the Steep Rock one where there was no consultation whatsoever. And we're going to talk about 2 more of these where before the fact that people didn't matter. It was just for the economic benefit of everyone. So anyway, glad we got sidetracked, because the Sherman mine was the mine in Temagami. I was searching for it. And the Adams mine was the one outside of Kirk. And both iron ore mines that, again, the pellets went down to the steel mills in Hamilton.
We're going to be taking a quick break to talk about the community for a second. Specifically, the North Bay community. I know this podcast reaches out to people all over Ontario and beyond, but specifically with this being the North Bay Echo Community Podcast Network, we are speaking more specifically in terms of our community, but it also extends to any local community as well. So obviously, one of the things that we pride ourselves here at North Bay Echo is our local reach. It's an ever-changing media landscape right now, where we're seeing a lot of funding and cutting that's happening, especially in northern places, and a lot of stuff being outsourced from bigger markets. So one of the things that we pride ourselves on here at Echo is the ability to be local and really focus on our local community. And one of the oldest and tried and true places in our community here in North Bay is Casey's Restaurant. So Casey's has been around since 1985, which is incredibly impressive when you consider the amount of businesses that have come and gone in that same almost 40 years period. It's actually coming up to their 40th year very soon. So the fact that they're still here, they're still strong, is absolutely fantastic. It's a great place to go eat. It's right on the bypass. So if even if you're just coming by town on your way up north or out anywhere there you're going, it's a great place to go eat. They have some fantastic food, some of the best food and beer in town, in a pretty lax environment. It's absolutely fantastic, and they have been also a great supporter of the Echo Network. So we would not be here if it was not for our sponsors like Casey's that allow us to create this content. So big thank you to Casey's for being one of the sponsors of the Backroads Bill podcast and of the Echo Network. So the next time you're in the area, please go to Casey's for a weekend filled with good food, great drinks, and even better company.
North Bay Echo is proud to partner with Twigs Coffee Roasters, a part of the community since 1995. Twigs offers a wide selection of quality beans, fresh roasted in-house every day. Find your favorite specialty drinks at our espresso bar, rejuvenate with freshly squeezed juice, or treat yourself to mouth-watering selections from our gourmet deli. And don't forget our irresistible fresh baked goods, including uncompromising gluten-free options. Twigs has 5 locations to serve you, from North Bay to Sturgeon Falls to Sudbury. Order online for pickup at twigs.ca. And coming soon, you'll be able to order fresh roasted coffee beans direct to your doorstep from our distribution center in North Bay.
So let's jump to the second one, because I know we have we have 2 more to get through.
Well, and I went to all 3 of these places this spring, summer. So these are stories that I've done that are they're really interesting, kind of big picture things that we just don't realize. So again, pull out the paper map, Ben, that you don't like, and the digital map, and go to the Google app. Go to the Google app, My Maps. People don't use My Maps. It's a Google app, not Google Earth, not Google Maps, but My Maps.
What's the difference, though?
Well, the big difference is you can make a link by making your map here, and you can send that link to everyone. It's really, really slick, very basic. I use it. I put it in every one of my stories.
Yes.
And click on it, and you open it right up, and I put pins in and highlight things and so on and so forth. It's a wonderful little app. So the next one, pull out the paper map, and you go to Long Lac. Now, town of Long Lac is west of Hearst. You got to drive 2 more hours on nothing for more than 200 kilometers. No gas stations.
Your favorite highway.
My favorite highway. And there's signs saying there's no gas for 200 kilometers, whatever.
There's a sign saying that?
Oh, absolutely. No, okay. Yeah, and there is none. There's nothing when you get past the turnoff to Hornpain going south, which we've talked about before, that's the geographic center of Northern Ontario.
Sasquatch, home of the Sasquatch.
Not anymore. The Canadian Ecology Center is.
Now it is. Yeah.
But back then they had their chance, but they've lost it. So
Sasquatch Sam took over.
Yeah, Sasquatch Sam took over. So and that was a great interview we had with Gerald Junkel and about the whole history of Sasquatch Sam. So Long Lac, and then Long Lac is a little east of Superior Greenstone, so it's a lumber mill town. It's closed down now. Long Lac Nation is at the very top of Long Lac. When you look at the lake, it's the longest lake in Ontario, but it's not a lake; it's a reservoir. So back after the Depression, they had this idea. They had it in the United States. They were going to create another Great Lake north of the Great Lakes, and you can see it's just a hand-drawn thing. But they thought they were going to make some rivers flow the other way. We've talked about the Haida land most recently with Larry Dyke. We talked about that north of that divide, that water goes to James Bay and Hudson Bay. The south goes to the Great Lakes or the Great Lakes St. Lawrence, and so. Back in the Depression, the water was important for power generation and water needed for mills. So Long Lac, when you look at it, that water ends up flowing down to Terrace Bay and which was the Kimberly-Clark paper mill. And back in the 1960s, it was when Greenpeace, some of the original protests, other than whaling, with Greenpeace, were right on that pulp and paper because all the effluent ended up on a pipe going out into the Great Lakes about a kilometer off the shoreline and polluting, a big, enormous polluter. And Greenpeace took exception to that. That's another environmental story. But that water from Long Lac comes down, and they made more than 5 kilometers long, almost 10, a kind of a canal to make the water go the other way, because the water in Long Lake is supposed to go to James Bay, Hudson Bay. It goes to Hudson Bay. They turned that water the other way around by making 2 control dams. One, just like you like in a sloshing bucket or a bathtub, so you make it flow one way, and the control mechanism one end makes it flow the other way, and the other one lets it out. So that was created. Long Lac, which is a reservoir, tremendous erosion. When you drive through Long Lac First Nation at the top end, Highway 17 goes right by, Highway 11 goes right by it. You can see the berms, you can see the riprap all the way along the shoreline. In fact, you'll see a little island, which is a cemetery. Half of it was eroded away from that particular place, and so they've had to mitigate that whole area. Anyway, all that water went down, and they created a power dam going out of Terrace Bay and for the mill. And so that's an environmental catastrophe, no consultation whatsoever, and they made water flow the other way, make this enormous reservoir, all for the sake of economic progress going into the 1930s.
Wow. And there's a novel that you quoted it in your article too, called The Great Lakes Water Wars by Peter Annan. I believe you mentioned that earlier.
I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but it
might have been off
But
air.
it's a book. It's nonfiction, and he talks about the water wars. So the second example I'm going to talk about is called the Ogoki, Ogoki, the Ogoki Reservoir, which is way north of Nakina. So it will be the road that goes north of Nakina by First Nation and headed towards Martin Falls First Nation, which will be part of the Ring of Fire road into the Ring of Fire. But it only goes so far. It's not completed. But Martin Falls First Nation's working on it now on the route. But the Ogoki Reservoir is another example where they were going to make that river flowing to the James Bay, Hudson Bay. They turned it around. The one dam at the one end is wider than the Hoover Dam in the United States. Not as deep, but wider than the Hoover Dam. And that was a control structure. And then another one not so far away made the water flow the other way as in a gradient. And engineers can explain it much better than I, but it's just imagine something flat and you turn one end up and make it create the slope to make it flow the other way. Now that water ends up in the north part of Lake Nipigon, and White Sands First Nation was completely kind of obliterated by the water levels and the erosion. Before I forget, 3 to 4% of the entire Great Lakes water comes from these two water diversion projects.
So this was also affecting the existing Great Lakes.
Well, yeah, no, they wanted more water because of the St. Lawrence Seaway. They wanted more water for power, mills, et cetera, et cetera. So that water affected White Sands First Nation. They had to mitigate the whole shoreline. And then they put, I think, 4 dams before the Nipigon River enters Lake Superior at Nipigon Red Rock. And you can see them, the 4 dams. And so Lake Nipigon became a larger reservoir in itself, not just the largest lake in Ontario apart from the Great Lakes, because often they call Lake Nipigon the next Great Lake. And again, it was much smaller than it was until they made that Ogoki Reservoir. Again, all that water went into Lake Nipigon and then down into Nipigon River and out into Lake Superior at, as I said, Nipigon Red Rock. So that was another one in the 1930s. Thereabouts. So people just had these fantastic ideas and they just did it, didn't consult anyone. They just did them.
So
just imagine the economic impact. I mean, it was a lot of labor, hundreds and hundreds of people working in these camps over X number of years and then creating these water diversion projects. Sorry.
But what happened? Like what, there must have been, because obviously it didn't happen, right?
Yeah.
They weren't able to create like another Great Lake.
No, well, just about. They created Lake Nipigon, was much bigger. The other concept of another Great Lake was going to be on the Albany River, and that would have been even more colossal than what we just talked about. That did not come, and that was the brainchild of a couple of American engineers and some Canadian engineers, not even hydrologists. They were just engineers. Thought this would be a good idea.
There's got to be like political backlash, right? Or there's got like what was the ramifications now?
Well, from Sir John A. Macdonald right through, no one cared about the interests of First Nations people. So they just did this for the betterment of economic development. That's what they did. So sort of like the same as the Transcontinental Railway. I mean, they just built the railway. Well, we'll just do this. I mean, there was no public consultation, and the main reason they thought, there's not many people there living there, or none, and Indigenous people didn't count.
Wow.
So that's how these things occurred. But those are colossal imagine rivers that should flow in one direction, they turn them around and make them go the other way. And again, these are on the scale of like things like the Panama Canal and the Suez Canal. When you think about it, these are mammoth projects. We talked about when we had our guest on about Abitibi Canyon and living in
Bob Hunter. Yep.
Yeah, Bob Hunter. Thanks for that. And the song about Wade Hemsworth, who John Pino sang in the Blackfly song. They made the little Abitibi flow around the other way. Those are the lyrics right from the song. They did the same thing to make that Ontario Power Generation network work much better because they needed an outflow and an outlet.
And that would never happen today with the consultation that has to come up.
Well, here's a good example, though. Most recently, the New Post First Nation, the Peter Sutherland Generating Station, is on that Abitibi River, and they were in full consultation to create another smaller generating station based on good consultation. In fact, in essence, they righted a wrong from the 1950s. They righted it by doing this, but that's another story. But the Steep Rock iron ore mines, the Long Lac, and then now the Ogoki Reservoir, these are mammoth projects that no one, again, when you just look at the map, Long Lac, Ogoki, what are these things? Well, and people don't know that there's a big, in the background, there are huge environmental stories that would never come to be today.
Yeah, and it's like, as you go over, I think that's kind of where it's a good thing that the environment has, like, there's a lot more consultation from the Indigenous
Checks and
peoples.
balances, yeah.
Yeah, and which is good. Has there been a lot of, I'm sure there's a lot of political backlash, or like that's part, like when the government is talking to a lot of these Indigenous communities, like I'm sure a lot of these things come up, right? A lot of these things that weren't consulted and that weren't talked about, like they could be used as examples of things that have happened in the past.
Back in the day, there was no consultation, period. There was no political backlash because no one cared. No one cared about First Nations. As we go forward, and we talked a bit about Justice Murray Sinclair and Truth and Reconciliation, we talked about the Red Squirrel Road blockade. As Indigenous culture and rights became more forefront, and of course the uncovering of residential schools and its huge impact, we started to learn about all the other catastrophes and things we were doing to First Nation peoples everywhere. Mm-hmm. And so it became, we were finding out that there was no consultation about any of these big water projects, mining projects. Now it's a totally different day because of the Mining Act, because of face-to-face consultation on traditional lands and economic benefit agreements between First Nation communities and the mines, of employment, indirect and direct services, etc. So it's a whole different day, and of course this is occurs in a lifetime or so of recent history.
And it's funny when you look back at history, especially in the 1900s, in the early to mid 1900s, the amount of the Wild West almost in terms of like policies and stuff where they've just done everything. We talked about the Georgian Ship Bay Canal, like the potential of that, like some wild ideas when you look back, and some things that like these are three great examples of projects that if they were proposed today, like the Ring of Fire has taken forever. And it wouldn't have taken that long 50, 60 years ago, or I guess
they just would have went up there and did it. If the technology existed, they would have just did it. That's what they did with the three examples we just talked about. Same with the Adams Mine, same with the Red Squirrel Road. But then it was in more contemporary times when people thought, hey, this is not right. This is going to impact people, whether it's Indigenous people or farmers and whoever. Everyone said no. And this is how the whole rise of the NIMBY concept, not in my backyard, evolved. And so I would guess, we're in a better day. Modern mines are good examples where there is a lot of consultation and there's a lot of checks and balances. There's a whole process. There's a lot of policies and things have to be done right, including the mine closure plan. That people don't realize that you have to post these bonds. You have to have the mine closure. The most recent mining tour I was on was to I Am Gold, Cote Gold near Gogama, and they're already reseeding the tailings dams in the backside of these things. And the mine has right now a shelf life of 18 years. It'd probably be longer if they discover more deposits. And so they're doing it right. And again, they've had consultation. Through consultation with Flying Post First Nation, Matagami First Nation, they moved an entire lake, small lake, but that was through consultation, and they thought it was done right. And how they did it right. So things can be done that way, and things have certainly changed. Locally now, we're the Bocage mine on the Manitou Islands that had niobium, uranium in it. And they brought it over to the shoreline, and radon gas was released, and there are instances of cancer and stuff. And now they want to move the rock to another place. It becomes another NIMBY, a micro NIMBY example, but on and on it goes. So you can think, wasn't too long ago, and that's what the Red Squirrel Road was like, about old growth forest. People wanted to save old growth forests. People don't realize too, though, when you go into an old growth forest, there is no white pine regenerating itself. It takes logging, windfall, disease, whatever, to create a new white pine forest. But the majestic trees are great to look at. People say we should protect them, but they're eventually going to fall down. And that doesn't mean white pine trees are going to grow back. But I'm a little off topic, but there's all these NIMBY examples. Well, you think about even North Bay and the contaminated water from all that fire training that occurred up on the
PFAS stuff,
and all that stuff that's filtered down in some of the creeks. So there are, and how they shut down the one the pipeline going across that was going to come through North Bay and across Trout Lake, probably out by the Narrows. You can pick any community, and there'll be some sort of issue that you have to come to. You have to come to some sort of middle ground or resolve about it. But that's why we live in the society we live in, that we can come to reasonable solutions. And
it's interesting, like as you say that, talk about the community and like the not in my backyard stuff, because that happens a lot where, people don't like change, and people don't like stuff that potentially could be harmful, which is fair. But it is, I will never forget when, so like I lived right down the street from, like growing up, from Tweedsmuir, like the school.
Mm-hmm.
They had obviously a ball field there. They closed it. It's now a soccer field. And I remember when I used to go and play there like almost every day when I was growing up. And it was just funny, like as soon as they closed it, all these people came out to be upset about it. And it was like, I don't even know who half these people are, and I'm here all the time. And it just, as soon as change happens, a lot of people come out of the woodwork and they have opinions, which is right, can be good, but it's kind of as soon, and I can understand what you're saying, like as soon as things are in your community and in some way affect you or change things, it becomes a hot topic. And there's a lot of people who are very opinionated on that. And it makes it hard to get things done.
In the Steep Rock iron ore mine story, you should look that one up. Because I was flabbergasted again by that comment about more aggregate was taken out of that hole than the Panama Canal. So switch over to Timmins. In Timmins, we have two examples. Well, we have three examples. One will be that open pit mine that'll eventually become a lake in the middle of Timmins. That's a success story. On the other end, we have what's called Kamkosha, just outside of Timmins. It's like sulfuric acid. It's the worst environmental nightmare. They've always spent millions and millions of dollars to mitigate that site. That's going to take a long time and a lot of work. And then you've got another one in Timmins on the tailings called Conneorum, which has won awards where they've regreened the tailings area, and on the edge of it, there's a Indigenous kind of ceremonial center right on the edge of it, and they've worked with Indigenous people on this. So, there's all kinds of examples. So not everything has to be, environmental catastrophe, but there has to be good thinking. I think now, as far as, often I say we are a mean-spirited race when you look at what's going on in the world, but I think there are good examples where people think about doing something and they try to do it the right way.
Well, one of the good things I can say is that it seems like we've mostly learned, I should say, from our past experiences, and hopefully these three big catastrophes don't happen again, which, to be honest with you, I can't really see happening with the amount of regulation that happens in today's world. But you just hope that, again, we've learned our lesson about the importance of our land and respecting it. If there's anything that you got out of this episode, it's that, really. If you want more episodes of the Backroads Bill podcast, you can check us out on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Of course, we are always available on NorthBayEcho.ca, and the video version of this podcast is available on the North Bay Echo YouTube channel. New episodes of this podcast drop every single Wednesday morning, and of course, over on the North Bay Echo website, you can also find other great local podcasts on To North Bay with Love. For instance, yesterday's episode, we talked about Sweetman's Gardens, which has been a hot topic in the community. It's been something that's been focused on Echo Essentials, but we really wanted to bring in some people to talk about the importance of Sweetman's Garden in the community, the impact the garden has had, and why it's important to North Bay residents. So less political and more, what does it mean to the people in this community? If you're listening to this on the day of release, then tomorrow on Echo Essentials at 2 p.m., Gary Gardner rejoins the show to talk about the new twin pad that just got approved. That's another hot topic that's been around. Definitely polarizing. People on both sides. Some people love it. Some people think that the money could have been spent in a different way. He also talks about some updates on the Elmwood Community Hub space as well, and he does touch a little bit on Sweetman's Garden. Of course, he is one of the people who is part of that whole conversation. So that wraps things up for us here, but join us again next week for yet another Backroads adventure. Founded in 1968, Voyageur Aviation is a proud member of our community, providing worldwide aviation services from our headquarters right here in North Bay. If you're looking for a challenge, change, or want to expand your current career in aviation, Voyageur is hiring for a wide range of technical and non-technical roles, including pilots, aircraft maintenance personnel, corporate administration, machinists, supply chain professionals, and more. Be part of a workforce that is over 400 strong, supporting humanitarian, government, defense, and civil aviation operations around the world. For a career in aviation and beyond, learn more about open positions and career paths at voyav.com.